I'm joined here on the Managing Violence podcast by Mark Hatmaker. Mark, you are long overdue, my friend. We have had so many of your contemporaries. We've had so many people on the podcast that you seem like a glaring omission now at this point that we're at episode 90 something, and finally we've got the great Mark Hatmaker on the podcast. So we've achieved something. Thank you very much.
Hey, I appreciate it. Great. Way a bit of an overstretch, brother. I appreciate just being here. Thanks for asking, man.
Well, you know what? You can make whatever judgments you want to make about quality, but there's not too many people that are more prolific than you when it comes to generating content. But like if you living under a rock, and I guess especially if you didn't come up in the era of having to get all your supplementary knowledge from the back of Black Belt magazine. You probably don't realize that Mark was one of the early guys that had like a DVD on everything and a book on everything. And he was the first guy not the first guy, but he was one of the first guys I remember that was like, man, this guy's really got this whole remote learning thing down. Like it's
I am definitely loquacious. It doesn't imply quality, but I do talk.
Look, I've been following your stuff since the beginning of my journey. I think I first came across your material maybe in the early 2000s, so it's going on 20 years now since I first saw some of your material. The ABCs of NHB. I mean that gives you a bit of a dating, because I mean the term NHB isn't even used anymore.
Exactly.
But Mark, for those that maybe don't know much about you, let's just tell your story a little bit. How did you get started in martial arts? What was the origin story there?
It's nothing dramatic. It's probably it's just like most people. Everybody just wants to do martial arts, but mine, in a sense, kind of you slip in backwards. Where our focus has always been somewhat of a Western martial arts, but in a sense, when I were kids, myself and a handful of my cousins, we grew up around my grandfather, who was at one time a coal miner in Virginia, and apparently he did a little bit of what he called scuffling around the mining camps. This isn't legend we're talking about; just something that he did. We took this for granted. So we would begin amongst our cousins, him setting up little things like he'd fill old duffel bags full of rags for us to punch around in the barn, and have this kind of scuffle around, knock each other around, and throw each other around, and kind of say, hey, no, do it this way, do it that way. But it really was nothing formal about what we were doing whatsoever. It's just what, in a sense, I thought everyone was kind of, this is what your grandpas do with you, right? Turned out not so much. So I mean, that was the beginning. Later on, when you start realizing, when you're mixing with others, that you're going, oh, this is okay, this might be something a little bit different. So in a sense, that's the beginning of it, and that's my fondest memories of it. And after that is applying the intellectual overlay, and perhaps too much talkativeness for me on top of it. So that's the germation of it.
Yeah, so you start off with I guess informal training or less structured training.
Sure.
When does that become formal study of martial arts, or at what point do you sort of think this is something you want to pursue?
Oh, good Lord. You start putting that into early mid-teens is whenever you start making this transition from going, oh, what we were being shown from the grandfather is one thing. And then already the fascination with throwing some hands and twisting things up was always there. They just started kind of broadening the perspective from there, trying to add some things in. You probably did like everyone else, dropped into, hey, here's what a Taekwondo class, here's what this class is. It was really like a big Whitman sampler of trying different things to see what you thought. And then each time you went, oh, that's pretty cool, we'll take that. I mean, I don't think there was a martial arts worth their salt alive who didn't read some of that, absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and the Tao Jeet Kune Do. And then that's not a new way of thinking. Clearly it's been going on forever. So in a sense, in my young immature mind thinking, well, I should give that a shot, absorb what is useful, at least for me, for whatever my body size was, whatever my attributes were. If there's anything I've got, if there's a talent, it's being a good synthesizer of information, and always having kind of a mat. We always call it ring tested, mat tempered. You got to take each technique and idea. You don't dismiss it out of hand unless the older you get, the more you go, it ain't gonna work. And then you got to go roll around with it. You got to mess with it and find ways to see if it does work for you, your style. Does it work under pressure? Does it work under chaos? And does it work for individual body styles? If it's only working for a handful of people, like you got to be like 280 and ripped to shreds, and well, this isn't going to be useful. We did a show to a female client who comes through, and vice versa. So there's that.
Yeah, so I'm really fascinated with your approach. I mean, you were talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and submission, grappling, I guess, really early, like really really early before BJJ fanatics made millions of dollars out of doing that stuff. Right? It was
I was fortunate enough. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that it was you're one of the few at the time that was actually doing high quality instructionals in that space. When did you start incorporating grappling? I mean, it sounds like it was part of, like, sort of loosely part of what you always did, but
it was
you start formal training?
Great point. No, it was loosely always there. And then whenever you start doing this, casting your net wide to look at everything, and I'm with you at the time. Whenever we would start trying to incorporate, and we were looking at something like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which by all means is not the only grappling we do. We look at everything that we can. But at the time, whenever we would say, people would ask questions, what's this? Oh, this is a little thing from something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And it's so weird to recall a time when people would go, what? And because now everyone knows what that is. You can just see BJJ and people go, oh yeah. And then at the time, people said, people couldn't point to Brazil on a map at the time. And that's no disrespect. It's just that, that's the animal we were dealing with. Now, to be fair, since we were working with so many things, we had lots of things that way. And now, since we've kind of really pushed into the rough and tumble world, we're still doing that. When we'll do a boot camp and stuff, we'll do a tactic, and people go, "What the hell is that? I've never seen that." I go, "Yeah, isn't that cool?" It was done by the Plains Indians forever ago, and so the object, that's what keeps this engine humming for me. I'm still interested. Is you don't have to spin the wheels in the same groove all the time. There's always, if you're a good archaeologist for tactics and strategy, there's always seemingly something out there. Just got to be willing to look for it.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I mean, so many people have said it over the years, and I think it loses its impact, but it's so true. Like, as long as human beings have two arms, two legs, a neck, and like our joint structure kind of works the same way, I mean, there are going to be similarities in technique and principles.
Absolutely.
And as you said, though, the ability to synthesize why a technique works the first time you look at it, because it's familiar because of the body mechanics or because of the principle that you can see at play. I mean, that's a really tremendous skill. And
no, Joe, you're preaching my language, Joe. I mean, it's I don't like dogmatized movement. I'm meaning that, since you said two arms, two legs. I mean, if someone says, like, what's your walking style, huh? And people would go, well, I walk just like they did in Bulgaria in 1380. And I go, well, I think we're all walking around now. And then people kind of get so nitpicky and arguing about angels in the head of a pin. You go, no, just. It's walking, right? Let's figure out. I mean, there are obviously different ways to walk, but obviously it's a weak analogy for martial arts. If people want to get compartmentalized in only one style or one aspect of something, more power to them. That's just never been my flavor, my cup of tea. It seems a bit limiting for me. I understand it gets to corral and marshal all your thoughts and energies in one direction, but I guess maybe you put it down to a poor attention span on my part. I just think there's so many flavors at this buffet. I want to hit them all if I can, see which ones work and make the best.
Yeah, I'm curious. What was for me, like, I guess my motivation to train has shifted over the years. I mean, it started off with being don't get bullied, and then it became competition and sport, and then from there, I started bouncing, and then it became, well, okay, I need to actually learn some skills, or need to adapt my skills to the real world. And then then the reality-based self-defense stuff just got a little bit repetitive and stressful for me, and I was like, I went back to just doing traditional arts because it was fun. And then it's sort of back to sport, and then it moved on and on. So for you, I mean, has the focus always been purely combative application in terms of self-defense, or has that shifted over the years as well?
Oh no, that's a great question. I love that layout you just had. In a sense, it shows that you got the questing mind. It's something I understand completely. You go, if you stay too long in one area, it just seems repetitive. And like, you got to sometimes switch it up, or else I think you can get burnout and want to leave altogether. What's going on? No, not always just combatives. That was a big part of it. And then there went to a point of, I came across a quote from Gene LaBelle that it was something, the man has forgotten more submission holes than you'll ever know. And I thought, oh man, what a great thing to live up to. So I want to learn every one that ever existed. And I set myself a couple of decades. Well, there's a really hard decade in there. There's like, I'm going to everything. You find it and then figure out what works, and then you start learning those. You start realizing pairing off, put it down to 12 broad classes of subs, and you start going, well, this is really particular if this is ever going to come up. I'm going to need a corpse, a very flexible corpse before I get in this position, what have you. So there was that time, that was the flavor that went on. And then there could be a straight combative thing. And then my mind really kind of flipped in that area. So I'm with you. You've got to keep tweaking and moving around. And where I'm at now with some of the Western martial arts, the rough and tumble in particular, it allows me kind of a beautiful amalgam, at least where I am in this part of my life, to be able to go, hey, if I want it to be as vicious as possible, I'm right where I need to be. If I want to be able to pair off a few things and make it where I can still play with some clients or training buddies, we can clean it up a little bit and be kind to one another. And still, yet I've got a huge historical Jones running through my body, so it really appeals to me. I mean, digging deep into the history and allowed me to expand it. Hell, I started taking up working, 6-gun fast draws and spinning and gunplay work and all that, just because, some of these people were hitting each other with guns. Then I thought, well, I need to be more familiar with it, because I was never much of a tactical shooter. But once it became, if I pan this camera around, this house is covered with repeating rifles and 6 guns of all sorts. And there's not a day that goes by I don't work with those. So it's really expanded what I play with. Now, these weapons are impractical compared to, stepping out there with someone with the Glock. You go, yeah, but I don't care. It's what I like to do. So, and it's just part of the whole historical feel of the milieu, if you will.
I love that. To me, one of the things that sometimes makes it hard for me to be around the combatives crowd, and I'm part of the combatives crowd. Like, obviously, I'm part of the community, but like sometimes you just got to do stuff because it's fun. Sometimes you just got to do it because you're interested in it. Because to me, training should always add to your quality of life, not detract from it.
Yeah.
Training shouldn't be something you feel like you have to do, or else you're going to get mugged and murdered. Right?
Exactly.
Training should be something that actually improves your quality of life. So.
Oh, absolutely. No, and I'm with you. I think there's a part of, and the combatives, I'm with you. You're a part of it. I guess I'm part of it in a sense of this combatives crowd. But I see living life there. I don't mean just the training life there. I mean the mind there. Thinking you're always on red all the time is just exhausting. And I also think it's a bit of a myth. I don't think you can really do it. I mean, there's the deeper I've been in my studies, the whole Western milieu, we've come across tabi nanika, which is there's these long ideas how you train warriors. In a sense, I'm going to distill it down to, you've got to be able to notice the good before you can see the bad. And then the bad will pop out like a turd in the rose garden or something like that. And so I'm shocked at how many people, I use small self-test all the time with my people who are locked and loaded and good to go. And trust me, I've done many seminars with good folks, and I'm naming no names. I'll stand next to them. I'll watch them do 3, 4, 5 hours of a boot camp talking about eyes always the prize, always ready. And I'm in an airport with them. They're like everybody else, heads down, just going through the phone. I go, hey, we're in an airport. We're supposed to be on alert. We're looking at the phone. Huh, interesting. One of the hard parts about scheduling this thing is I don't carry a phone with me. I have a smartphone. I don't text. I don't do anything. And it's not because I'm hyper alert. It's just not my flavor. It's not what I like to do. But I thought, these guys don't live in the red line all the time.
Yeah.
But if I'm in that same airport, I can look around, I can start a conversation, I can come up with friends, and I can do all sorts of things. And I think in that sense, I might possibly be a bit more aware of what's going on. It's by the fact I'm looking for a friend. I'm looking for something to do. I found a new piece of art to look at. And if I'm busy looking for those things, I think maybe I might notice the bad thing if it pops up more than if I was sitting there doing that with my phone.
Yeah, that's such a good point. These guys are always, I'm always ready, man. I'm always ready to go, bro. It's like, oh, you're just always an asshole, man. You're just always assuming someone's trying to rip you off or trying to scam you. You're just an objectionable human being at this point, right?
I love that turn of phrase, brother. You said it, but I agree with it. So high five, bang.
Let's talk a little bit about Western martial arts. I mean, it's something we haven't spoken about in a huge amount of detail on the show previously. We've talked a little bit about combat sports, but one of the things that I first remember about reading your materials was I'm pretty sure it was something that you wrote about bare knuckle boxing and about the differences in fighting. The value of boxing from a self-defense point of view, but the changes that have happened with gloves and style and so on. So we'll do an in-depth episode on bare knuckle boxing at some point in the future. But what's been your flavor with that? It sounds like you started with bare knuckle, or started with learning how to throw hands in a reality situation, not in a ring situation. So how's that journey been for you? What's your journey through boxing?
Well, I think boxing, and this will be back to referencing what we said earlier with the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. I think anyone who looks at it, I'm probably butchering the quote, Bruce Lee saying a man with 6 months of wrestling and boxing training is going to destroy the black belt and on. Now that might be a stretch, but I don't know how far of a stretch it is, because you know from the very beginning we know boxing says you're going to throw hands, you're going to get hit, you're going to test yourself, and you start determining if you're inculcating yourself to the inuring yourself to the grit of receiving a shot. There's something to be said for hitting. There's this difference between playing football, even if you're with your buddies, you're knocking each other down, and playing flag football, which is just let's do no contact, let's not hurt each other. And the same thing with grappling. You get thrown around, you get crushed, you get pressured, you get squeezed, you get pretzeled up, and if you're only working things that don't allow you to be uncomfortable, I don't see how there's any transfer or there's any ability to be transferred to something else. It's like you said, you've been a bouncer, you've worked reality. I'm sure you can imagine there's many people who look great in drill or the package might look great. They talk the good game, but one open hand slap on some people seems to be all it takes. And you go, all right, then theory is meaningless. Sometimes you just got to just push someone's face in the mud a few minutes, and how they come up and what their demeanor is after that. You go, well, I can work with you, man. You're good.
Right. It's sometimes not even the open hand slap. Sometimes it was just a strong word or just a look.
Yeah.
And people are like, I've never dealt with conflict before. I don't know what to do now. Like it's
exactly. I'm amazed at how often this small thing works here and says, man, yeah, me and you 12 o'clock, or next time, and if you just say, hey, we're both here right now, huh? And then it's like, oh, well, no, let me check the schedule.
Sorry, I've got a thing I've got to get to, and
no, I think we're both cleared on the books right now, right?
Yeah, no, that's very true. Sorry, I interrupted. We're talking about boxing. So I know you've written a book about boxing, and I probably several. I mean, you've written more books and created more DVDs and written more articles than I think most of our listeners will ever live long enough to read and consume. What's your take on sport boxing versus self-protection boxing? Like, is there a difference in how it should be trained?
Well, we'll put it down as kind of an 80-20 rule. 80% of sport boxing is great for street work. We there's no doubt about that, because of the training aspect of it, the banging aspect, getting used to having the mechanics down, the speed, the rapid turnover, and going to work. And then if you had a 20% layover of going, hey, just adjust your targets a bit. Let's look at some of the old schoolers. Let's say, hey, let's not bang at the head. So let's punch them in the neck. Let's hit some throats. Let's hit some hearts. Changing, moving things to soft targets, adding in some of the illegal shots and the mean down and dirty. I don't think you have to make that much of adjustment. Because probably, again, most of the value in boxing is the fact that it is a contact sport, and it requires contact. So that's really how, I don't know if I'm divining, getting to the root of your question there, going, that is just how much do you have to tease them apart between the sport and the street. I think they're so closely entwined, that's going to be useful. You can have a devastating street fighter who's only trained sport boxing. Now, if you add that overlay of the dirty on there, well, obviously it's going to be a bigger beast. But I don't know, there's not a lot of other combat endeavors where you can say someone who's, excuse me, only the sport version of it, we would also think of as devastating the street. And that's not to malign others. I just think we're just stating a fact by dint of it being the contact sport that it is. For example, we could say someone could be the best tennis player in the world, but we don't think of them going, and I'm not saying it can't be true, formidable in an altercation, but we can have a great linebacker in football, and we think of the altercation in the street. We go, well, who do you want with you, the tennis pro or the linebacker? I want the linebacker. Why? Because he's used to hitting things, getting hit, knocking things down. And if I need a good backhand and we have some rackets, give me the tennis pro.
Yeah, it's a great analogy, and like I fully agree with you with the 80-20 split. I think that's about right. Even when I was teaching reality-based self-defense for guys guys and girls, but let's be honest, mostly guys, mostly young guys, that were interested more in combatives. Like, it got to a point where I was like, guys, like, you will get more benefit from going out and joining an MMA club or joining a boxing club or doing a combat sport thing, and then coming back every now and then and doing some scenario work, doing some drills and some exercise with multiple attackers, and just to adapt your skills. But like the real honing of skills happens. Like, if you can't apply them in a sporting context when it's one-on-one and there's safety, then how the hell are you hoping to do it on the street when it's multiple people and there's no safety? Like to me, like the first
Joe.
step is to be able to do these things, right?
Yeah, Joe, you and I could hang, brother. Where are you? Where do you live?
I'm in Melbourne. It might be a couple of years before I can get over to you.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, man. I'm telling you, I'm fairly certain our conversation one-on-one would be this. Preach, go on. I agree. A lot of me nodding my head, man, because everything you say, I go, you didn't even have to ask me. I'm just going to let you talk.
It's not how you do a good interview, but let's roll with it. I think what you're saying there about boxing is, I won't say it's completely unique, but it's relatively unique compared to other combat sports. Like my background is predominantly judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I've dabbled in MMA and striking arts along the way as well, but not to the same degree, not to the same level. But if I look at sport judo and sport Brazilian jiu-jitsu as an example, I mean, there's a lot of adaptation that has to happen to make that closer to reality in terms of especially the modern game of BJJ, the modern game of grappling, where a lot of the sporting applications really only work in a sporting context, or they're only really safe or advisable in a sporting context. Whereas boxing, I feel like there's really not much about punching and fighting, other than maybe the relaxing in the clinch. Like other than like once there's contact, we stop. I think other than that, that's pretty much the only bad habit from boxing that you'd probably weed out when it comes to a self-defense point of view, or you'd have to work on with a sporting boxer. But maybe not so much the case. Although that said, I mean, wrestlers I wrestled as well. I mean, wrestlers pretty much like, I mean, they're difficult to deal with no matter who you are. They're strong, they're fit, they're aggressive, and they don't mind pain. So
yeah, no, and you nailed it. That's the other thing. I think back at that Bruce Lee observation or quote. I mean, because the boxing and wrestling requires contact. It is the endeavor itself. It is conflict. It is the struggle. It is the fight. So these two disciplines, and since neither of them are necessarily gear dependent, whereas BJJ and judo, God, I love both of those as well. But we do know so much of it is either gi dependent, or whenever we remove the gi, say, oh, we're going no gi, you can see the mind working hard to make what was the gi still exist, and we're going to do an alteration. Where wrestling has never thought in the sense of what handles might you have, what piece of tool might you be having to assist me in this. Where wrestling is always going, the human body is what I'm attacking, and I think that really helps someone who wants to go from 0 to 60 to understand how to grab and bend another body. That's super helpful to not to have to work through the twin disciplines. Well, tonight's gi night, tonight's no gi night, and I think in a sense you don't have to pick a lane. But if you're thinking along the lines of strictly hewing towards street combat, you might want to pick a lane a little bit and go no gi on it.
Yeah, there's and I think I just had this conversation. I think in a couple of episodes before this one will come out, we just had an interview about the art of instructing and really understanding what your student is trying to get, because those of us that are really passionate about martial arts, like we're giving them the start of a 10-20 year journey, and they might only intend to stick around for 10 classes.
Yeah.
So sometimes, like, you know what, no, let's play with the gi, because I mean, if I've got a long time to work with you, I want to build fundamentals and I want to develop that skill set over time. But if you're training because you've got an abusive boyfriend that you want to deal with, or you've got a looming conflict, or you got issues at work that, you know, your work is subjecting you to real violence because of what you're doing, like, I need to give you practical skills right now. We don't have time to sort of build a base and work from there. So I mean, a large part of that is obviously instructors, but it's also, I think, being honest with yourself as a prospective student about what do you need, and can you communicate that to your instructor, so that you do we jump straight to no gi and start doing some applications and some cranks, or do we build fundamentals? So it's
no, absolutely. And I think that's part of the being the non-dogmatic about how you think about it, because you have defined it correctly. If we have somebody comes in and says, I want to do sport BJJ, and you go, well, you've got to have the gi. You define what they want, and that's the path. Like you said, if someone's in an abusive situation, I think, well, we start talking about gi, well, that's almost criminally negligent. That's not what they're there for. And that the onus of you're an asshole at that point. You're well, no, they came to you, they trusted you, they looked at you as the expert, and you're giving them poor advice.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Let's shift gears a little bit. I'm really interested to learn about rough and tumble. It's something that I've only read about. I've never had a chance to train it. I've never really absorbed any real instructional material in it. Let's give me a rundown. What is rough and tumble?
Man, it is a broad base. If I'd be alive, I didn't say I'm trying to still work on how to corral the entire thing down. The Because it's such a wide variety of techniques and tactics and strategies coming from many different parts and regions of a disconnected American continent. So to say it is rough and tumble is all this thing or all that thing or just one thing, it's just not the case. So, I mean, there's striking included, there's grappling included, there's biting included, there's kicking included, there's weapons included. It's all those things to act, but for me just to go, oh, it's this, it is, and think of it just being like something else, it's not. It just really is almost an all-in viciousness, whatever worked, and it's got lots of overlay of where the Americas were like this great big melting pot of cultures and ideas. The same thing was occurring in the combat aspect of things as well. So if we expect languages to change and culture to change and cuisines to change as people mix together, same thing happened with lots of fighting styles and tactics.
Yeah, I'm interested in that because whenever we try to recreate something of the past that maybe hasn't been documented as well as we'd like. I mean, we see this in a lot of Western martial arts, even something as simple as well, I won't say simple because of that is that's not fair, but like fencing manuals and dagger fighting manuals and like Lacan manuals, things from that, like the Renaissance period and not and even more recently than that. I mean, we're still looking at hand drawn images where printing was expensive, right? Like printing was expensive. It wasn't accessible. We had to try and keep things short. We couldn't have a video. We couldn't have put out a book that has 1,200 photos that are all professionally shot. So there's a lot of interpretation in between those artist representations of techniques, right? So and that's
yeah,
when we've actually got.
I want to build an observation you're making. Yeah, and I want to build on that observation because your observation is dead on. But if we use your point of talking about fencing manuals and dagger manuals, etc., I believe it's both. Is it Richard Cohen who wrote By the Sword? Then Egerton Castle in his way early, the turn of the last century, his sword manual, and even Richard Burden and his sword manual. We're talking about a lot of the sword manuals we forget were what was distilled and being written for the gentleman. So in a sense, we're getting the closer to cleaned up. And this isn't for all manuals. We're getting closer to the cleaned up rule-based aspect of the game. And Egerton Castle makes the point that if you really want to know what interesting tactics were, you're going to have to look to the as he was putting the lesser classes, the ruffians, what they were doing, because they're the ones who couldn't afford good armor or good blades, and what they were doing in the shadows of things. And I think that's the same thing with rough and tumble. If we just look at old boxing manuals and old wrestling manuals and assume that we're seeing, oh, rough and tumble is a version of this, maybe meaner. And I don't think that's the case. You're going to have to look at things that are a bit more peripheral to it and in the shadows, as it were, to find out what's going on within that and try and help piece together. But yeah, the archaeology of it and recreation of it is a tough game.
Yeah, and look, I think for a lot of arts like that, sometimes it's just the pleasure of trying to uncover stuff and going through different oral histories and finding someone who was taught something by their father, who was taught something by his grandfather, and then like, oh, that's kind of cool. But I mean, you never really 100% know. Like anyone who had an interest in it has already absorbed other stuff. They've been watching UFC. Like they're gonna go, oh, that was in my grandfather's style, right? It's
no. Yeah, you were on it, and I think it's back to that the point you made at the beginning. Everyone's got two arms and two legs. And it's hard to say. Are you seeing something that was pure from this time period? Are you seeing something that has a later on overlay? And chances are you're seeing a bridge or a mixture of the both, since we only have the two arms and two legs to make the hit. And I have to admit, some of my more intriguing archaeology in the area of the rough and tumble is not just a strict hands-on, like I subscribe, I'm in so many historical societies, browse so many estate sales, and I've got so many seemingly historical materials that you would seemingly be outside of the purview of the combat realm. I mean, you've got to read settlers' journals and letters and all sorts of things. And it's sometimes between the lines and sometimes these small bits and dribs and drabs of information in there that actually leads to help you start putting together the synthesis of information that gives you a better idea of what's going on. And I also think it's big to live in kind of the milieu of what was happening. I'm going to use an analogy I've used before. Recently, I spent some time working on bareback riding, Comanche bareback riding. Chris Wells, he was showing me showing me the ropes, as it were. And I've always been a fairly good leg wrestler, using legs for top position riding and all this. When it came to Comanche bareback riding, he was kind enough to say, on the first session, he says, "Oh, you're like a talented rookie," which is, it doesn't mean I'm good. It just means I'm not falling off. But I think a lot of everybody said I had good leg strength, good base and all this. And it struck me when I was riding, I said, oh, this is so much of my leg wrestling is coming through with this. Then later on, after I came back from it, by the way, I had a blast. It was one of the dreams of mine, and I'd love to do it again. When we came back, and when we were going back on the mat and doing some work, I've noticed some slight alterations in my leg riding. And that's whenever, and this isn't the first time this has happened, but I realized so much overlay is occurring. Whenever we think about leg wrestling really being developed, this is a time when everyone was either walking or riding on horseback. So everyone rode, everyone had a good understanding of base and balance and how to dig in and spur in and ride with each kind of shift of every single step, every stride, every mile on the horse. And it's something we don't have now. So I think there was a whole lot of just being a horseback culture and how your legs work when it came to leg riding. There's almost an overlay of a leg education, understanding of balance and base and how you move your legs slightly differently, that we as modern day folk who don't ride all the time, particularly if you don't ride bareback, it's a completely non-akin feeling to it. So I think sometimes looking at areas that are tangential or not even seemingly interested or overlapped in any way, they turn out to possibly be quite significant. So it helps to look at the combat and everything that might have been going on in life at the time and see if this starts informing the actual tactic or strategy itself.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I mean, it's something I've thought about just in terms of like our modern world and how much stronger our grandparents seem to be, right? Because the manual labor wasn't a choice. It wasn't something that you pursued because it was a choice to do it. That was just like you either did that or you didn't have anywhere to
exactly.
You didn't have anywhere to live, or your house got flooded, right? If you could even know how to fill a sandbag, then tough for you, right? So I think we take for granted a lot of the conveniences we have, but we also forget about what are some of the factors that were causing people to move in certain ways that gave them a certain strength or a certain appreciation of how fighting works.
Oh, Joe, you're nailing it. I think that's what a lot of the in between the lines is when we're looking from our so-called elevated or future perspective to some of the past. We are trying to do that overlay from our UFC mind or our current mind or Black Belt Magazine mind and say, oh, this is what was going on then, whenever the secret might actually be in if there's anything about how to cast an lariat or lasso or bringing a cow down. Sometimes if you look at the mechanics, almost everyone knew how to toss the rope, and you're looking at way that we're hitting on the hock, where they're hitting at the knee and all this. You go, same thing. That sort of thing is informed how a good roper brings down a cow. It helps the same way that you can do a better takedown. There seems to be a great understanding of the mechanics. Dropping a big beast with that rope, and if I'm not saying that you're gonna have to grab a rope and drop, keep your eyes wide open, you're being wise awake about it. I think you're gonna see some things you go, oh, I can steal that though. My takedown, my single leg just changed. It's a new world right now.
Yeah, 100%. It's such a cool thing to be able to see. Like I think it was Musashi. It's like where he said. I won't even try to paraphrase because I know I'm going to butcher the quote, but it was basically like you see the way in all things, right? Once you start to understand the principles, you see them everywhere, and it's my biggest frustration is when people look through. They evaluate a martial arts style or a combative system based upon whether it would work in the UFC. And yeah, I mean, like the UFC was a tremendous evolution in terms of our understanding of what can work between two trained athletes, but it's not representative of all realities, right? So I mean, something
Right.
as simple as like, okay, yeah, that is the best way to throw a punch in a sporting fight. But I mean, maybe the way this was thrown was equating for the fact that everybody was armed, right? So if everybody's armed, then why are we having a fist fight? So that, I mean, that
Right.
there's certain assumptions from a behavioral point of view we need to make about having a fist fight when I could be pulling out a dagger, right? So there's
No. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
a lot of pieces there.
Right. No,
Yeah.
agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about we start talking about rough and tumble. I mean, from I mean, my understanding, and it's a, as I said, a very lightly informed, I think would probably be a very be a generous way of describing my understanding of rough and
Yeah.
tumble. But my understanding is that it was basically oral histories and generational passing on of information from different Native American and early Western American fighting styles, more or less, of surviving in frontier environments. So very much sort of no holds barred in the actual sense of the word, where we're
Mhm.
fighting for survival. Um, is that fairly accurate? I mean, is that kind of what you're playing with now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're not going to find. I mean, trust me. If it existed, I think I would have found it by now. If there's not going to be. Oh look, 1848, rough and tumble, how to. That doesn't exist. There's no manual that way. And whenever saying someone's referring to a rough and tumble, a dogfight, or all in fight, and all this, they're just referring to an overall tussle. Like when I might, if we might say, hey, these two frat guys got in a fight at a bar, that would be easiest transfer and say a rough and tumble. What term for we're going to go, hey, we're seeing the gauchos when they're using the blade, they're doing this. I mean, well, there's a strong propensity to see this coming out of this culture in this region. Yet, whenever we look at the blade, up here amongst the Basque people, or over here in Nebraska, we're seeing this, and then you're just seeing all these disparate things, whether it was armed or unarmed, and then overall trying to throw them under this vast umbrella of called rough and tumble, and seeing, you know, and playing with them and seeing when you shake them out if they still work for what our particular scenario or our uses are. Like I said, we're going to UFC, or what our current UFC of the mind, or the street, or just having the fun of historical recreation, and then put them under that broad rubric of rough and tumble, and you kind of compress it together. If someone's looking for a straight ABC sort of systematized thing, that didn't exist. You're going to find, yes, there would occasionally you're going to have a skilled bare knuckler or grappler or roller out there who was moving through frontier planes and all this, but it was more like, you know, somebody having set good at this sort of thing, or put it to test in lots of different melees. And our job, if we're trying to redo rough and tumble recreation, is figuring out how to add some systemizing to something that was not systematized. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to change gears a little bit, I'm
Mhm.
curious to get your thoughts on this as someone who's been around the martial arts like pretty much your whole life, and you've been part of different communities within the martial arts throughout your career. Why
Mhm.
is it that you think that the Western martial arts are not as popular or not as widely known as Eastern martial arts?
Um, well, okay. One, let's take that question two parts. One, I think they are popular. Everyone, boxing has always been in the forefront of minds. And then right now, wrestling. I mean, it fell away in popularity, and is it less so? I don't have a smart man's answer to that. The best I can say is just the stickiness of certain fashions, fads, or cultures. It was there was just something about whether it's comic book marketing. You know, the burst of how, for some reason, martial arts, kung fu movies of the 70s, everything from the Shaw Brothers that comes out, you know, the Bruce Lee, whether he would have continued to be a star after he died, or if he was lightning in a bottle and he didn't have to have the pressure of a follow-up film to make us look more closely at it. It just, something became fashionable. It seemingly stuck, and everyone looked eastward. Not a problem with looking eastward. There's things there, and that held. So whenever you thought martial arts, you thought, well, it has to come from that. I don't know if that's the answer to it, but it sure seems to be. This is a period where people go, oh, everything exotic, amazing, and secret and cool came from there, and we can't overlook the history of things like boxing. Definitely was always considered you know, a lower class thing. We figure whether most fighters and champions were coming from it, people thought, the lesser folk. That's not in a race sense. That was talking about, remember, Jewish fighters at the time, fighters coming out, Vinnie Leonard stuff coming from the Jewish ghettos. It was a time whenever you were thinking, nice boys don't do that. So it was, as that percolated in, it became safer to go as a suburban, let's say, helicopter parent to go, you're going to drive your kid to the gym, the boxing gym over here. You're going to drive your kid to Gleason's gym, or you're going to drive them over here to the Taekwondo thing in the strip mall where they don't hit each other in the face. So you don't want to the orthodontics work, so you take them to the Taekwondo place. So, I mean, I don't know if that's the answer to it, but that's my best surmisation of what I think happened. It just got sticky, and it's safer. Because they're asking you to bang each other that hard, at least in the versions we have here.
Yeah, you just remind me of something my first wrestling coach told me when I was about 15 or 16, and I was wrestling is an incredibly niche sport even still here in Australia. Like there's very few wrestling clubs, but in pre the explosion of UFC there was even less. And I found wrestling after spending, I guess, 10 years in my childhood and early teens doing traditional martial arts. And I loved the contact. I loved how hard it was. I loved the pride of just finishing a training session because it was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I said to my coach was Yuri Markov, who's a former assistant coach of the USSR national team. And I said, Yuri, like, why does it, Australia has great athletes. We have great swimmers. We have great basketball players. We have great everything. Why don't we produce good wrestlers? And he goes, Yuri, Australia never have good wrestler because Australia care too much about human rights.
It might have nailed it there too.
Yeah, he did. He really did, because he was saying like the things that it takes to make someone tough enough to wrestle, like we would never willingly subject someone to.
I mean, there's wisdom to that. Whenever we become parents, we want the best for our kids. We also want to protect them and shade them. This is, hey, when I get to an athletic endeavor, you never say to them, why don't you take up death fighting? No, we think, well, or some, let's just do the kinder thing. You want to take care of your kids. You don't want to throw them into the mix and go, your chances are going to be scarred for life if you do this. Your kicks are going to go out on you. So, yeah, I think your coach might have, his is a far better answer than mine.
I mean, look at some of the countries that produce the best fighters, and for a lot of them, it's like, well, you either succeed or you're in poverty. So, I mean, the motivation is pretty high.
We call that the ghetto theory, and I think that's absolutely right. Usually, warrior classes were underclasses. No matter how much we later on would get pampered and removed from it, and we start elevating warrior mythos, and I do that myself, and you receive much to admire there. But at the same time, the people who are writing these eloquent pieces of philosophy on the warrior mythos, for the most part, that don't mix with these same folk. They go, oh, well, yeah, they're great to talk about in the abstract. To go, but you're right, it's going to come from a position of who's hungry for it, right?
Yeah, the Athenian philosophers didn't want to hang out with the Spartans, that's for sure. So there's a few pieces there. I think, coming back to your original answer to that question, though, I think there's a lot to in terms of just our bias, in terms of the era we live in. Like, I mean, since the 50s, really. I mean, when you say the word martial arts, or you think of fighting arts, the mind immediately goes to white gi, black belt, right? I mean, that's kind of the image. And whether that's karate or taekwondo and ninjutsu, depending on what decade you're in, like pretty much they all sort of followed that pattern. And now it's MMA. But if you went back to, say, pre-1890, I think that's probably the turning point. Pre-1890, if you asked anyone in a Western country, like, how do you learn how to fight, they would have said boxing, wrestling, fencing. Like those were going to be and maybe pistol shooting, depending on where you were. So, I mean, we are kind of biased by our I guess our recency of reference when it comes to popularity.
You nailed it. We're looking from where we're at. We're assuming universal knowledge over the time period. And I said, I'm going to go back to what I said about these regional percolations of culture coming in, because, in my studies, I'm seeing references to Savate in Texas,
Wow.
in the 1870s, 1880s, 1860s. I'm seeing, and it was a different variation of Savate. And we're also hearing things about hatchet play In San Francisco, we got to think about, we have this huge influx of Chinese coming in, whether it was originally to work the railroads and such. So there's some interesting influence of the Russians through the Alaska territories. There's all sorts of things, but you're right. Overall, you're going to think someone who can throw hands, someone can shoot, someone who can use a blade, someone, some of the more standard things. But in these individual pockets of regions, you can find references to things that you would completely not expect, but you do not find one, shining example of, oh, you do martial arts. Yeah, it's something from the East. You go, no, that wouldn't have been the case. You would have found whatever cultural inflection was.
Yeah, I had Tommy Joe Moore on a few times recently, and Tommy wrote a book on Bartitsu, which obviously was in practical terms a very short-lived martial art, right? And the guy Edmund Barton, and he really taught it for a couple of years, and it's kind of survived by thanks to the Sherlock Holmes novels. It's really the only reason it's still around. But Tommy said something interesting. He said that Barton was he taught mostly jiu-jitsu because he was working on the assumption that everyone already knew how to box. Right? Like if you're in Victorian England and you're a male wanting to learn how to fight, then it was expected that you already knew how to box. Like
exactly.
That was just a fundamental skill set to have. And
that's back to what we're talking about with the leg riding and riding a horse. Everyone assumed, I don't have to tell you about base and leg strength and spurring in and running the hip through it and why. Well, you ride. Like I said, it's the same problem there with the boxing, or the same conundrum. You assume everyone's swimming in these waters. So we're doing this. So again, that's part of our assumptions from on high, is your same point you're making, that we're looking backward to really looking at one frame from the motion picture combat. Whatever, there was lots of other things going around there. There was people already steeped in the middle of it. Like we're talking about grandparents being harder and stronger. They didn't have to go to a CrossFit WOD because you're going to go, wow, putting supper on the table was probably the WOD. So
there's no energy left for any WODs after that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's I often say to people, do you realize you're probably descended from someone who took a human life at some point?
Oh Lord, I hope so.
I mean, there's a good chance if you go back far enough, someone's had to do something, right? So that's an interesting one. Last question for you, Mark, before we go into some bonus round questions, but for the main interview, one thing I'm always curious about when I meet someone who's had a tremendous amount of longevity when it comes to their training and be able to, I guess, be a thought leader, and that's, as much as that's a modern term, but I mean, you've been around for a long time and you've been producing high quality content for a long time. What do you attribute your longevity to, firstly in terms of physical training, but secondly in terms of continuing to push the envelope and stay relevant?
Staying relevant, I don't know if that's true.
Relevancy follows you, my friend.
I can only answer in terms of me. What keeps me going personally? What keeps me driving forward? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah,
because I have zero idea what would appeal on the outside, because I live in a bubble. For a long time, I've been fortunate enough, lucky enough, or foolish enough to pursue what interests me. And so whether that's going to be, like, for example, in our recent black box project, which we're doing with our raw subscription service down the line, is pretty much rough and tumble. I mean, for the longest time, that was just like being in the weeds, nitpicky, detailed about just submission stuff. And I was honest to the subscribers there. I've pretty much left that behind, guys. I'm doing rough and tumble. I'm just doing mean stuff. So I don't know if if it would be probably wiser for me to stick with whatever the market that was feeding me, but I got to go where my interest is the whole time, so I don't feel like a pretender to myself. And I think that would come across in the instruction. I would start being a pale imitation of how I used to present things. If I want to keep my enthusiasm going for others, I got to make sure that I feel the enthusiasm within myself. And right now, that enthusiasm is pursuing these huge umbrella disparate studies of the rough and tumble. So staying intellectually stimulated is part of the key. And the more I like it, enjoy it, and feel passion for it, the more likely I am to continue to produce content that hopefully has some relevance to it, to steal your word. Physically, it's the same thing. They're intertwined. I don't separate them. If I'm passionately interested in something, I'm going to want to read it, do it, smell it, taste it, feel it, cook the recipe, and live it. I mean, I can't read a boat about a keelboat fight and how people were doing stuff without wanting to get out of a boat and going, I'm going to run the river for a few days to see what it feels like to live on the river, and that turns into obsession afterwards. So, everything. If it's like if I'm reading Comanche bareback riding and someone jumping off a horse and jumping on someone, I went, I'm going to do that. I want to see what that. That's just my thing. That's just what keeps me going and perking and living. So I don't know if I've answered or not. I think my main thing is feel passion for what I do, and then if I'm doing it right, then that will pop out to someone else. They'll read that passion and ride with me.
Yeah, awesome. Any particular tips regarding keeping your body healthy or being able to continue training? Is it like after a number of years of being as my English friends would say, having the corners knocked off?
Yeah.
How do you feel? What's an average morning feel like?
I've had knee surgeries. I've busted up so many things in my life. I work around a bum knee and a bum hip and a bum elbow. I'm not saying anything that new to anyone who hasn't done this for a long time. I'm 55, 56 in a month and a half. You feel it. I mean, if you really want to stay safe and like whenever you're younger and you're training and you have the older guys that saying you're going to feel that when you're older. We've all heard that, and they were right. And I know anyone who's younger than me hearing that is going to go, right, I hear you. And you're going to continue on doing what you're doing. If there's anything to say, if you want to you probably want to choose sports or endeavors that have less knock around in it. But I know that's an impossibility because I still do it because I still love it. It's going to happen. Injuries are going to happen. They're going to accrue. But I have also, along with everything else in the experimentation, if all my training has gone to everything I used to do for training, I even had some training programs that we put out there. I no longer do any of that stuff. I'm completely, anything that I unearth in these old ways of doing it. I mean, it's always the experimental method here. I don't take it as gospel. I'm going to try it. I'm going to do this for 90 days to see how this works and keep adding on the overlay. If anything, I might say that beyond injuries, and then we got to always keep those in there, I feel like I'm in the best shape of my life. But that's beyond injuries, and there can change things up a lot. And I think there's a whole lot of wisdom with the old guys were doing. Keep in mind, they didn't have boxes around. They didn't have Globo gyms or anything. It wasn't chasing fads. It was making sure that you were fit and ready and prepared to go what's going on. And there's a lot to be said for strengthening the tendons and the ligaments and the joints, taking care of the internal musculature, making sure these things are supportive. Don't worry about the show muscle, the aesthetics, because if you take care of the foundations, I have found that the aesthetics follow. But the main thing, if you want to stay fit and healthy when you're old, don't get injured. But that's, you do this, there's no way around it. But with that in mind, I do think running red line training all the time is a recipe for burnout and injury. You're gonna have to find something that you really can do for the long haul. And this is speaking to someone who's 55, that's not ancient, but it ain't young. So there comes a point where your redlining will it will eat you up. And so you've got to find a better way to maintain than that. Did I answer that, or did I just wander all over the place?
No, it's a great answer. And
okay.
I'm always interested in people's approach to that. And there's a common wisdom that comes like pretty much anyone who's managed to be consistent over 30 plus years is that you're going to have peaks and valleys. You're going to have times when you need to just back it off and just have fun and just do some other stuff and and then start being selective about who you roll with. Don't just spar with everybody. Right. leave your ego behind, because your ego is what gets you hurt. Like those are pretty much universal answers. It's always cool to see what people have to say about that. But Mark, we're coming to the end of the main interview, so I just want to give you an opportunity. If there's anything that you're doing at the moment that you want to direct people to, any websites you want to send them to, where can they find out more about you?
Main website is www.extremeselfprotection.com, all one word. I didn't choose that name, a long story about how that came about. There you can find a clearinghouse of most of the stuff, all the books, the DVDs, the subscription service. We do run the blog over at look at the website. I can't remember the name of the blog is Indigenous Ability, where it's just kind of the catch-all for some history, some science behind what we're doing, and lots of it's all over the map. It's whatever my passion is for that day whenever I'm putting it out there. So there you go. It's a catch-all sort of thing. The main project, but we got others coming up. We got some more commercial products coming up from other folks. I'm not ever allowed to mention those until they come off. Probably Boxing Like the Champs, the third volume. We're working on that when that comes out. I don't know. COVID put everything in this holding pattern. Main thing we're working on is what we call in our subscription service, the raw/black box subscription services, where it's kind of a clearinghouse of each new immersion iteration of whatever we're doing with Rough and Tumble at that time. We put that on the subscription service. There's a DVD plus written syllabi per month. We kind of treat that as like, imagine it's gym fees. That's it. I think it's $26.50 per month. And we, every month you go, I wish I had an hour or so of Mark talking plus a printed syllabi of stuff to train an old school rough and tumble. Guess what? We have that available for you.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice. All right, Mark, thank you very much for your time, mate. We're going to stick around and do some bonus questions with you in just a second. But for those leaving us here, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time. And it's been a great pleasure to talk to you.
Hey, Joe, I appreciate, one, you asking me. Two, I mean, you're a good man. I love the way you think. I love the way you talk. And I hope to have the opportunity to meet you one day.
We'll make it happen. It might be 10 years from now, but eventually we'll be allowed to travel again.
I look forward to it, brother.
All right, Mark, I'll get you to stick around and do some bonus questions, but thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Surprise! As a special thank you, if you've listened this far, given that this is our last episode before taking a little bit of a break, and I'm going to miss you all so much, I've decided that we're going to keep the bonus content in this episode. So if you've never been a contributor to Patreon and you're wondering what you get in the bonus content, there's a little bit of a sample of the sort of things you can find in the back catalogue at patreon.com/managing violence. However, please enjoy this bonus content from Mark Hatmaker, free of charge for this episode only. Thanks. All right, that's good, man. That was a lot of fun. That was a good chat. So.
I no lie on any of that. Are we recording right now? Or
yeah, I'll edit it out. It's fine. Yeah, it's just.
It doesn't matter. I just want to say honestly. I mean, I do a few of these here and there, but one, you working with me to get around my weird habits and schedule. Two, your questions, you're on point. I mean, I told you nothing you didn't know. You're squared away. You know your stuff, and man, it just comes through. I mean, I really appreciate it. This has been fun.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. This podcast has been like a weird kind of apprenticeship. I've had the opportunity to spend a couple of 100 hours talking to pretty much the greatest minds in the field, and it's and people thank me for it. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I would have had to pay thousands of dollars for this if it wasn't for a podcast.
I'm not gonna lie. I've sat and talked to people who are. I would be waiting while they're just talking. I don't know what the question is. They're going, but you're on point, brother, and your stuff. So it makes this kind of thing fly and feel less like a chore. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. I'm just talking to a guy I like. Cool.
Nice. I love it. All right, man, let's jump straight into these bonus questions. So we'll let you get on with your day. So back here for the Magnificent Seven bonus round with Mark Hatmaker. We just had a fantastic chat about Western martial arts, rough and tumble, bare knuckle boxing, Soviet disregard for human rights. So we covered a spectrum. We're in the bonus round now. None of this stuff is easily searchable, so we're good to go. All right. So first question for you, Mark. What's your favorite book? And I know this is a hard question for someone like you, but what's your favorite book you'd consider essential reading on combatives, martial arts, or violence? And yes, you can give multiple if you like.
I'm going to give a single author, and it has, and I'm going to justify it because it has nothing. It's seemingly nothing to do with violence, martial arts, or anything. Anything by Nicholas Nassim Taleb. Wrote Anti-Fragile, The Black Swan. I'm losing it. The Bed of Procustes. Anyway, any title by him has been some of the most significant impact on my thinking in the past since the first one came out. The way we understand of that we don't really understand nearly as much as we do, taking uncertainties into consideration, how much chaos is in, how much we fall for narrative fallacies in almost everything from our personal lives to larger narratives. Super significant for me. Now, I don't know if it's so much changed the way I thought about things, or was the finger or the pointing at the moon validated or kind of gave some beautiful expression to how I went, yeah, I kind of thought that way, but have it so crystallized is super useful to me in all aspects. But I definitely would be a liar if I didn't say that has come into how I approach training and looking at things. The concept of the flaneur, the losing narrative fallacy, losing all theory, and really testing things and being really open to uncertainty is super useful to my approach.
Oh, I love that answer. I've asked this question so many times, and not that I don't, not that I disagree when someone says the gift of fear, or I mean, yeah, absolutely, 100%. It's a fundamental reading, but when I get one that I haven't had suggested, and I actually read Nassim Taleb because professionally I'm a risk manager. So
Oh,
I work in the field of risk. So yeah,
oh yeah.
so I read their stuff a lot.
It is significant.
Yeah.
That's how I can't say enough. Even if it's down to the research, trusting the idea of going, what are you looking for in your research? I don't know.
Hmm.
That's the key.
If I start looking for it, I'm not researching anymore.
Exactly. I need to read this journal written by the pioneer woman. Why? Because maybe. And that's
Yeah.
it. And
Yep.
you realize it justifies and it opens up and you start getting your over. I mean, I'm telling you things you already know as a risk manager. There's so much wisdom there. And when you tunnel on anything, you dogmatize on anything, chances are you're wrong and you're going to miss the true path.
Yeah, I love that. It's if I can share with you one thing that it's a recent piece of wisdom that's kind of just keeps like bubbling up in my head as being
Yeah,
like a slap in the face for me as as I'm figuring out my own stuff. But it was Facebook of all things. I saw a meme. And it was a quote, and it wasn't attributed to anyone. I need to Google it to find out who the original person was. But the quote was something on the lines of, tradition is a set of solutions for problems we no longer have. But when we take away the solution, we get the problem back. And and I was like, oh man, like how many times have we looked at something and gone, well, that's outdated. That doesn't need to work. We don't need that anymore. And we rip it away. And then we get these weird problems that we've never seen before. Because
no, you're dead on. It's back to the Talebian response of we need to look at heuristic patterns, the so-called grandmother's wisdom, and we try and over, like we said, why I you know, honest with, like you mentioned, Gavin de Becker's book, good book, and I've read all these. I no longer read anything like that. Why? Because I don't know if there's a whit of difference between. I'm sure you've read many of these. They're going, oh yeah. We've heard it, right? The chances are the really deep answers are going to be, like you said, something that's already been said and in an area that you had no idea was your area. And then you hit you, whether it's you rode something bareback or you rode a river or you read this book of poetry by someone, you went, wait a minute, is this all of a sudden about boxing? And you go, yeah, where it's going to be.
Yeah, also something that's been there that we've just sort of written off and not realized why it's there. You know,
preaching true, brother.
I'm a big fan of cliches. Like people say, don't use cliches. Like, well, the reason something's a cliche is because it was true at some point, right? Or else people wouldn't have kept saying it. So,
yes.
yeah, absolutely. All right, question 2 for you: who has had the biggest impact on you professionally or in your study of martial arts?
Well, I guess I'd have to say that it would go back to my grandfather. I don't know that I would have done any of this, without that initial, hey, we're having fun. And it was never this, handed down wisdom, come with me, Mark and cousins, we are going to explore the world of scuffling. No, it was just kind of something that we did naturally. I have immeasurably fond memories of doing this with my grandfather and my the cousins who were all about the same age. And I had so much fun with it. I didn't want that whenever my grandfather passed away and we all started moving away from each other. I didn't want that feeling to go away. So I continued on from there. There's been tons of influences down the road, but without that spark from that wonderful old man, whose name was George Washington Golan. What a great name. Then I wouldn't have, I wouldn't have done this. So, he's the guy who started this, for good or bad. It's been good to me.
Awesome. All right. Question number 3. What do you think is the most overlooked aspect of violence management or self-defense training?
True mind setting. That's it. I think this is the kind of answer that I give that basically puts me out of work. And I go, you don't need anything. You don't need to do anything. You don't need this gun disarm. You don't need that. I mean, unless you're front lines law enforcement professional, just need to learn everything about being alive and awake and aware, not in the red line version. Notice the good to notice the bad. If you are eyes on the prize, chances are you're going to walk through this amazingly getting safer world, despite as the news will make us think there's other things going on, but they're conforming to the extraordinary bias. You got to report the shark attack, not all the people having fun on the beach. That for the most part, if your eyes are awake and you're paying attention, you're doing all the sensible things. Do you keep a fire extinguisher? Do you check it each month? Do you know how to use it? Yes. Smoke alarms, great. Do you lock your car when you walk outside? Are you paying attention? Now, we can't solve for incredible randomness, the shooting that just happens. You just happen to be in the midst of stuff. But then again, knowing the gun disarm whenever it's they're already spraying, well, that's nothing. You might have wasted a lot of time and money learning how to do that. Not to say guns disarms are useless or anything, but I'm saying for the most part, the overlooked thing is undervaluing the constant preaching of, if you're paying attention and doing all the right things, the risk is greatly reduced. If you're doing those things, but I do know some people, and I wager you do as well, who know lots of ways to take the gun, and yet again are looking at the phone in the airport. And you go, I would value the guy whose eyes are up and away and doesn't know anything about disarms over that.
Yeah, 100%. It's I'm often telling people, don't focus on the 1% things when you've still got 10% things on the table.
Yeah, that's well done. Yeah, I like it.
Question number 4: is there a difference between preparing someone for violence and making them a great martial artist?
Yes, because martial art is buried in the word itself. Because as an artist, you can be considered, as a sports person, you don't have to be prepared for the chaos if they're going to slash my throat. Is this a mass attack, whatever? I'm sure we've all known people who are performed beautifully in grappling competition, striking competition, or MMA competition, who not necessarily going to do well whenever the guy comes in, with a straight razor slash right at the face. And, that's a different realm. And it's not saying anything bad about them if they perform poorly or behave badly there, because that's not what they train for. That domain specificity of the sport is not the chaos of all of a sudden you went out to pick up some flu medication for your wife at 3 a.m. and all of a sudden someone jumps you over your right shoulder. I mean, you behaving poorly there in a time you didn't pick, that's, you were prey at that time, and that's okay. And also as a martial artist, maybe someone is a great forms competitor, or they're wonderful with nunchucks, even though you don't need to be walking around with them because it doesn't make any sense as a weapon to me. But that sort of thing doesn't need the violence overlay. Now, violence is completely different. We need to have the shock training, the combat training. You need to have some emotional climate raised. You need to have, take some bangs and bucks and all of this. So yeah, I do think there's a difference there. And it's back to what you said. Whenever your students come in, you're going to define what it is they're looking for and figure out if you're able to offer that on the menu.
Yeah, great. Question number 5: what do you think are the most effective elements of a stress inoculation program, and how important is it for preparing people for managing a violent incident?
That is a great question, and it is. I don't know that there's a good answer, because I think you have been in this a long time as well. I think you can do tons of stress inoculation and still not prepare for all contingencies. I'm going to give you a boring story to say how I'm suspicious of many of these. I'm big on drill, but I don't trust drill. Meaning this, I learned a couple of years ago, I went and got my sailboat's captain's license, and learned every knot that's on the test. To tie them, right-handed, left-handed, one-handed, and you got to tie these under stress, under pressure, under time, and that's just one part of the test. And then, and I do this because, taking drill seriously, I believe you have to drill. At one point, we're in the boat, and I have to go tie this knot. The boat is heeling, so we're talking about us moving from it's close to 20 degrees heel. So that's a push on the deck. You're leaning, and I had to tie, leaning over the side of the deck. There's bone in the teeth, meaning there's white spray hitting you in the face. You're leaning over. There's no balance. You're sliding. Tie this knot. So I'm kind of hanging over a bit upside down with the spray in my face. I have to tie a knot that I have tied literally thousands of times, and that knot went away. I went, what the hell is this knot? Because it's because learning is so state dependent. I didn't learn it upside down with spray in my face. Now, eventually it came to me. Maybe I only took 5 seconds to figure it out. But in my mind, it was like an eternity. And also I went in an eternity in a true chaos situation. Unacceptable. So I think stress inoculation is key, but you're going to have to constantly play with variables to find as many chaos points as you can, so they will start resembling one another for a possible iteration that might occur in the real world. So single sets or only having a handful of chaos drills, no go. That's why, like on the outer limits, I think we got 70 something chaos drills, and I've expanded that to over 120 now. And even then, I think that's too few. I think you got to constantly change up how it might be presented to you to make sure you've got a snowball's chance in hell for your proper pattern response to come out.
Yeah, love it. All right, question number 6: what do you think is the most dangerous myth about managing violence?
It's something that you alluded to earlier, and I agree with it. I think it's this hoo-ah, eyes of the prize, head always on a swivel. Someone's always in this red line position, walking around like they're in a John Wick movie. And I think there's a lot of people who accept that movie, just like people used to accept kung fu movie tropes from the 70s and early ninja movies in the 80s. I think people are kind of doing that now with the combative thing, kind of walking around with a pose. that is not reflective of the actual battlefield you might be in or your everyday environment, or it's not even warranted for what we're doing in. I think that is a dangerous myth to think that means who already, when I think it's actually providing a poor role model for what needs to be done. I think there needs to be something a bit more restrained and governed. It needs to be that calm, kind of compassionate, stoic scout look. You got to be Jim Bridger or Cochise on the trail, rather than, like I said, the John Wick always up ahead. You know exactly what I'm talking about, I would suspect.
Yeah, and that's a great answer to that. I don't think anyone's ever really articulated that exactly that way. It's this idea that violence is coming, be ready. Like, I mean, yeah, maybe it depends where I live. Like, I mean, like I've lived in I've lived in this area for 5 years now, and violence hasn't visited me yet, right? Other than when I was paid to go find it. Like when I was paid to go find violence, I found violence. But I'm sure
exactly. Oh, you nailed it.
And I'm sure if I left my house at 2 a.m. and went looking for violence, I could find some. But I mean, it hasn't come to visit me because I tend to make like normal person choices. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's akin to the fire alarm, smoke alarm thing. We all know fires can happen. They happen often. Do you have smoke alarms? Yeah. You change the batteries? Yes. Do you check them every month? Do you change the batteries every 90 days? Do you have fire extinguishers? Do you make sure in the green? Do you know pull, aim, squeeze and sweep whenever you're looking at the fire? Hey, if the flame's higher than your head, get out of there. Don't use the fire extinguisher. Just those basic things, asking yourself that maybe once a month whenever you check the pressure in your fire extinguisher. Other than that, you don't walk around every day going, I'm always looking for a fire in my house. You go, that's a waste of time, man. Just be ready if there is. And other than that, you can kind of kick it to the curb and enjoy your day.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's be honest about our risk factors. It's Matt Thornton, who I think is one of the few people in the martial arts that I've met that I would say may actually be a genius in terms of his IQ. Matt, he put out a video with Straight Blast Gym in the early 2000s, and there's something he said in just a throwaway comment that just stuck with me. He said, when I've got a student who comes in and says, they want to learn jiu-jitsu for self-defense, my first question is like, well, what's going to happen to you if you don't learn jiu-jitsu? And they say, well, I don't want to get mugged. I don't want to risk getting killed. He's so why are you 40 pounds overweight?
Yeah.
And
you're a genius.
it's harsh. It's probably not good business, but I mean, it's honest, man.
It is on. I mean, we both probably know many folk who are involved in doing such endeavors, and you go, might seemingly look the furthest thing from being an athlete as can be, and you would have to call that into question. You go, I mean, I don't know if you can handle that disparity in your mind. You're going to go, oh wait, you're telling me it's that pot called the kettle black sort of thing, where you're going, okay, maybe your advice, it doesn't mean the advice is unsound. I don't want to ad hominem argument, but you do have that in the back of your head. You're going, aren't you going to get winded pretty quick? It's just one.
Yeah. All right. Question 7 for you. Last question for you. Beyond your current legacy, what do you still hope to accomplish or contribute to the martial arts or combatives world? And how would you like to be remembered?
Legacy. I like it. I am old, so I'll probably not be here much longer. I have.
Don't feel bad. I've asked the legacy question to people in their 20s as well. It kind of flips them.
Okay, well, no, I get it. It's a great question. My answer is going to be pretty substandard, because I don't think in terms of what you'll be remembered as, because I'm not here to hear it. And also, whenever I'm here and now, if anything, honestly, Joe, I love what I do. I'm passionate for it, and I did not just everything else. I love my wife, I love my family, I love going out and running the river. I love, hey, you ever climbed this cave before? I have not. Let's go, brother. I love that kind of thing, and I love the folks I meet for the most part. I'm going to butcher. There's an old Cherokee saying something about I've been to the ends of the earth, and there's nowhere that I've not met a friend. And I, like yourself, we've never spoken before till today, and I already like, you're a good soul, and I like you, and I look forward to one day sitting elbow to elbow with you, sitting over a bar or something like that. I just like the people, and if anything, if people just go, hey, I met that guy in person, and he was a nice guy, and I liked him, and I liked hanging with him. If I get that from people, hopefully while I'm alive rather than dead, that means I might get to hang with these people more and hang with more people. That's really, I want to love what I do, and hopefully I want to have fun with other people, and hopefully whenever I'm with people, they go, man, I enjoy him. I like that guy. He's all right. I go, that's a pretty damn good legacy in my opinion.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And actually, Rory Miller said when I asked him that question, he said, if people remember me, they missed the point. I love that answer as well.
Yeah, that's not bad at all. Yeah.
All right, folks, that brings us to the end of a great conversation with the one and only Mark Hatmaker, and also brings us to the close of this era of the Managing Violence podcast. As I said, this is not goodbye. It is just, we'll catch you down the road. It won't be too long. The itch will come back, and my time will free up, and the Managing Violence podcast will make a return. But for now, it has been my absolute pleasure, my privilege, my honor to speak to really everybody I've ever idolized in this world of managing violence. It's been an absolute pleasure to engage with you as listeners, as loyal tribe members. Thank you so much for making this happen. It really feels like I'm saying goodbye, but I'm really not. I just know I won't get a chance to talk to you guys for probably a couple of months. So I just want to make sure you all know how much I appreciate the support of the show. To all the guests, past, present, and future, thank you for doing what you do and making the world a safer place. We are, as always, #ForTheProtectors. Until next time, stay safe, create safer communities, be good to each other.